Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very informative show coming right up with special guest, Kristi Hugstad, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Beneath the Surface, a teen's guide to reaching out when you or your friend is in crisis. Kristi's also the author of What I Wish I'd Known, which addresses her husband's suicide. A certified grief recovery specialist and a grief and loss facilitator for recovering addicts at South Coast Behavioral Health, Kristi frequently speaks at high schools. She's also the host of a podcast, The Grief Girl, which is on a mission to help abolish the stigma of mental illness, depression, suicide, and addiction. So let's welcome to the show, Kristi Hugstad.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, what an honor it is to have you here. And gosh, I mean, this discussion couldn't be more timely. I mean, we're in the middle of Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. And I just think that this discussion needs to be had all over.
Absolutely. It's way overdue.
So for our listeners that are new to your story, you've written several books, but why don't you share with us a little bit about your journey? What's brought you to this place?
About 7 years ago, my husband, Bill Brotherton, completed suicide by running in front of a train near our house in Dana Point where we lived. And really, I started journaling as a way to process my own grief. And as time went on, I thought, you know what? I need to do something with this pain. And I have two choices here. I can either be a victim of my circumstances and wallow in self-pity, or I can get out there and do what I can to educate and help others so nobody else has to experience that overwhelming grief that I did. So it was, it's very personal. And anybody out there, any of your listeners who have lost a loved one to suicide, knows that pain and knows that darkness. And they also realize that your grief journey kind of never ends. It just changes. So my journal turned into my first book, which was called What I Wish I'd Known, Finding Your Way Through the Tunnel of Grief. And that's my story. But more importantly, the second half of the book is tools with specific examples of what I did personally in my grief journey. And then I realized, my husband was 54 years old, and the biggest risk group for suicide is middle-aged white men, right? And Bill bought into the stigma of mental illness. He was proud. And I think he grew up as a young boy thinking it's a sign of weakness to reach out for help and say, I have depression. So I thought, rather than just give people tools for grief that are in it, let's start the education and the prevention young. And so that's what inspired me to write my book that just came out a few days ago called Beneath the Surface, a teen's guide to reaching out when you or your friend is in crisis. Because I want our youth to grow up without that stigma. So if we can make this a normal part of our teens' conversation growing up, and just like when they go have a physical for school or sports, right? And they have to make sure that their heart is strong and they have to pass. Their mental health should also be a normal part of their entire evaluation. So we need to start young. And that stigma that is so rampant right now has to change. And the only way to do that is to have kids grow up, and it's a normal part of conversation.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's been such a taboo topic for so long. Having the ability to have open discussion about it, I think really changes things.
Absolutely. And, even it's changing, but it's changing too slowly. And as a result of that, more people are dying. So we've got to all band together. There's something that all of us can do to help get rid of the stigma. We all need to get involved. And, people listening might think, well, I don't know anybody with mental illness, or I don't know anybody who has died by suicide. But you know what? We all have experienced times of darkness in our lives. Every single one of us. That's part of the human experience. So what we can do is to reach out to people and say, hey, simple things like, I've noticed that you're really quiet the last couple of days, or you're not returning my texts or emails. And is everything okay? Or can we get together? Is there something you need to talk about? And just those simple little sentences, by reaching out and asking people, I've noticed a change in your behavior. That can make all the difference in the world. So all of us can take small steps to help end that stigma. And we all need to get involved for this process. And if we all do that, hopefully there are a lot of lives out there that will be saved.
Yeah, that would be such an amazing thing. And, it's interesting when we talk about mental health, a lot of times people don't put together the pieces of the puzzle that kind of encompass that. They don't look at, eating disorders or depression or substance abuse or self-harm. They don't look at all that as part of something like, hey, maybe we should see if they're okay. Maybe we should kind of dig into this a little deeper.
Well, maybe there's a reason why people are cutting themselves or trying to control themselves, because they have depression, or they have a traumatic life experience, or they're coming from broken homes and they're very, very stressed. So, these are symptoms of a bigger problem. And so rather than try to just, get a teen or anybody that's practicing self-harm or has an eating disorder, get to the root of the problem. What is causing this? And that's something that is not happening quickly either. And, nobody does self-harm just for no reason. The cutting, they want to they feel dead inside. So it's not always, a potentially suicidal act. It's just that they want to feel something because their life is tough and they've started to shut down, and that makes them feel alive. So I think, we need to improve our mental health resources, have more counselors in the schools. A lot of these large schools have one or two counselors that are also doing academic counseling, and that needs to change. The mental health of our youth is so important, and it's a lot different than when we grew up. Their stressors are things that, well, I know for me, and I'm sure you could agree, I had a safe place after school. So if I was being bullied, at least when I got home, if somebody wanted to bully me, they had to call my home on a landline and my parents might answer. So my safe place was being home after school. And unfortunately for our teens today, that's kind of when the cyberbullying ramps up. And the kids are home from school and they're on, their devices, and they're, tormenting people and, cyberbullying. And so it's just 24/7, and these kids don't have a safe place. So our schools need to have that place for kids after school that's more about developing relationships and a sense of community, rather than, leave school, look down, get on your iPhone, and stay on it for the next 6 hours. So a lot of things need to change. And the social pressures that our kids have today, the peer pressure, the academic pressure, the parental pressure, the self pressure to get into that right college, it's overwhelming. So I also think that parents and teachers and administrators, or anybody that has a teen in their life, we need to back off a little bit and take away some of those pressures so our kids can actually have a balanced life and be a kid. And, that's every generation, it seems to be getting worse. So I think, that whole social culture really needs to be evaluated and looked at, and we need to make some changes.
What are some things that we can learn about the teen brain that we might not know?
Well, the most interesting thing is that the teen brain doesn't fully develop until around age 25. And when you think about all these major decisions that, we make before that age, what college to go to, what classes to take, who to date, sometimes even to get married or not, to have children. Um, Sometimes the parents and the adults that love our teens are serving as their prefrontal cortex. That's where all the decision making and that sensibility takes place. So if that's not developed yet, we can't expect these teens to multitask, to get this paper signed, to remember, to bring these papers to school and then clean your room, and they're not wired to multitask like that. So I think we need to have a little compassion for that, and I also think teens need to be aware of that too. So they're not so, you know, defiant when parents and teachers try to make decisions for them. They need to understand their own brain chemistry. And that's why they act so recklessly and make really irrational decisions, because that's how they're wired. It's like, we'll act first and then think about the consequences later. And so that sense of reasoning and responsibility usually doesn't come till around the age of 25 or after. So I think it's really important that the teens themselves understand their own brain as well as everybody in their life, because the expectations that we put on them cannot be the same as an adult.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and it has me wondering. So if we think about this, and just how they develop, how they emotionally develop, I mean, there's a lot of expectation that's put on them that probably isn't really realistic.
Well, absolutely. They don't know how to navigate all this. I mean, when I think back, junior high was probably one of the most stressful times in my life. And I didn't experience most of the issues that our teens today are. And they can't be expected to navigate everything. And that's what's so frightening, is that they're not also wired and conditioned to reach out for help. They don't want to disappoint people. They don't want to disappoint their parents or their teachers. They want to keep their grades up and get into those colleges, probably more so for their parents than from themselves. So we have to help them out and take away a lot of these pressures, because that is what leads to the depression. And when the depression gets out of control, then all these other issues like the self harm and the substance abuse, they turn to drugs and alcohol to self medicate. So, there's a huge domino effect here. And I think we need to be aware of that and take a step back and let these kids be kids.
I was really shocked when I read your book and it talked about how 15 million kids in the US have parents who are suffering from depression. I had no idea the stats were that high.
Well, and when you think about it, there is a genetic component to depression. So for parents not to acknowledge that, maybe their kids will be at risk as well. And that's the problem, because the parents' generation is usually pretty heavy, bought into that stigma of mental illness. So if they're not getting help, and if they're not talking about mental health issues or how they're feeling, that's the role model, and that is what they are teaching their kids. So I think that genetics needs to be talked about. And like I said, when they go to get a physical for school, their mental health needs to be evaluated, and look at their family history, because it all plays a role in, the depression and the mental health of the kids.
Do you think that that also is part of the reason why people are feeling so lonely now as well? Because they're dealing with depression, and there's we're talking about it now, and their discussions are being had now as opposed to 20 years ago. But a lot of times there's still kind of a taboo topic when we talk about mental health. So I can understand why children or kids might feel like they're somewhat isolated if that's what's going on.
Well, the problem is that the adults in their lives are the ones that have bought into the stigma and have a problem starting conversations. And that's why in the end of my book, I have discussion questions for all of the issues in each chapter, so that a parent can sit down with their child and say, okay, I don't have to start the conversation because I'm uncomfortable. So let's just turn to the back of the book and this is a good way to start the conversation because the questions are there for me. So, that stigma and not being able to start the conversation has been passed down to kids. And I know when I go into high schools, I usually talk to 8th or 9th graders. And they know that I'm coming in to talk about suicide prevention. And I share my story and I teach the warning signs and the risk factors. And they're scared to death. You can hear a pin drop. They have no idea what to expect. They're totally uncomfortable. They know, part of my story. And the atmosphere is very tense. By the end of my PowerPoint, my discussion, they're raising their hands, they're asking questions. I ask things like, well, if you had been me, what would you have done differently? And the things they say are amazing. To the point where they actually stop me in my tracks. So it's up to us to make that conversation comfortable for our teens, and make it a normal part of daily life. So if you're a parent and you're picking up your child from school, instead of just saying, how was your day? You can actually take it a little further and say, do you know of anybody, any of your friends who have been unusually quiet lately? And kind of bring up signs of depression, gradually, like, my friend Nick, he's sitting alone at lunch or whatever, and then take it from there. So kids are following our lead. And we're the ones that are so uncomfortable talking about mental health issues. I will also say that the teachers are in the same boat. They don't know how to approach a mental health chapter in their health classes. And so that's another big part of why I wrote this book, because it's actually structured in a way that it can be a resource for schools. There's summaries, there's lists of warning signs and risk factors. There's personal stories of real teens with each of these issues, and resources, a message of hope, where to go, and then really importantly, all the discussion questions to teach and to make teens and teachers and administrators really aware of what's going on in their schools with their kids.
So when we look at parents and educators who are really having a tough time, and they know that there's a teen that's in crisis, but they're not sure what to do, how could they proceed?
Well, the most important thing is you need to find these kids that need help and then get them help and follow through. So, in other words, you have to talk to their parents. You have to follow up, make sure that they've made an appointment with a mental health professional. For me, I couldn't have told my husband, I think you need help. I think you need to go to a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I had to make the appointment and take him there. So the follow-up is what's important. Just diagnosing it and saying, you need help, that's not enough. You need to follow up, make the appointment, go with them, if necessary, and just make sure that they've got a safe place where they can process what they're going through and get help on a continual basis.
I think that that's such wise advice. It seems very simple, but at the same time, we see time and time again where we have just different tragedies that happen and a lot of warning signs are missed.
Well, that is so true. And, I'll speak from personal experience, and that's why I was so passionate about writing Beneath the Surface, because my husband was the textbook, picture perfect poster boy for every possible risk factor and warning sign, all of them. The risk factors, like he had 2 grandmothers who had a suicide attempt. So he had that genetic disposition. He had a prior attempt, before he ran in front of the train, He'd left me a suicide note, and there was an empty bottle of Ambien, of sleeping pills, next to the note. And you're 4 times more likely to try again if you've had a prior attempt. So, the withdrawal, the lack, the insomnia, or sleeping too much sometimes, the hopelessness, the isolation. So all of those risk factors and warning signs were right in front of me. The talk of death constantly. I mean, every day he would make a connection with whatever was going on to an opportunity to take his life. So looking back, all those risk factors and warning signs of depression and suicidal ideation were right in front of me. There were red flags waving everywhere. And, I did take them seriously, and I tried to get him help. But what I didn't do, and actually a 9th grader in one of my classes said that that's what I should have done, which kind of left me speechless, is I didn't sit next to him and, put my arms around him and said, Bill, I am with you 100%. You're going to get help. I'm going to do everything I can as long as it takes. If it takes forever, I am here for you and by your side, and we are going to get help. I didn't give him that sense of security, so I regret that instead of just running around making appointments and trying to fix him, that I wasn't reassuring him that I would be there for him by his side throughout this whole thing. And, it's going to be a lifetime process. And I did sign up for that. So that reassurance was something that I didn't do. And that's a really strong message I have for, your listeners out there. Be compassionate, be a heart with ears, and listen. But the frustrating part too is, I did take him to the ER, and they put him on a 5150 hold, which is a 3-day involuntary suicide watch. And at the end of that 3 days, a psychiatrist came in and said, did you take that whole bottle of Ambien? Were you trying to take your life? And Bill's response was, no, I just couldn't sleep. He's over 18. And so he just said he had no plans of suicide. And so they let him go. And when I took him there, I thought, finally, I have found him the help that I've been searching for this past year. And he's going to get a bed in this hospital in their mental health area. And they're going to work on his mental health and his depression. And we're safe. And when I walked out 3 days later, with my husband by my side, my jaw was open and thinking, I don't know what else to do. He was, obviously, they diagnosed him as suicidal because they put him on a 5150 and there was no help. So my frustration is that our mental health system needs to change. We need more beds. There are several other people that have reached out to me and said, I went through the same thing. My son was on a 5150 and they let him go because they were overcrowded and they didn't have beds. And so not only do people not reach out because of the stigma, but when they do, there isn't enough facilities to handle the people that desperately need them. And that is a big reason why we're losing so many lives to suicide.
It's excuse me, it sounds like there needs to be an adjustment on many fronts here. Just the healthcare system needs to approach this differently. Parents and educators need to look at this differently. And in your book, Beneath the Surface, really gives people a place to start.
Well, absolutely. And that was my goal. It's like the starting point is for all of us to get on the same page, know what to look for. And the message to the teens in the book, because I actually wrote it to teens, is if you see that behavior in yourself, in a family member, in a peer, tell an adult you trust. This is not the time to be sworn to secrecy, even if that person asks you to please not tell anybody. You need to tell an adult you trust. And what was interesting is I remember at a school in San Clemente near where I work, that was my message, be a friend, listen, don't try to fix them. They need help. Tell an adult you trust. And after that, there was a line out the door because I was that person that they trusted. I wasn't their parent. I wasn't their teacher. I wasn't the principal. I was just somebody that cared. And that's really what teens are looking for. And they might be afraid to tell a teacher for fear of a repercussion. Oh, maybe we'll have to pull you out of school. Or their parents may not understand and say, you just need to be tough and suck it up and get back to school, and there's always that fear that that when they reach out, it will be dismissed. So that's why all of us that have teens in our lives need to be that safe person or that an adult that a teen can reach out to get help.
A lot of that probably stems from, and this is just me guessing, I mean, I don't know personally, but I would think some of this would stem from their home environment. If they're at home and saying, hey, I'm going through these things and they're not being heard, why would an educator listen to them?
Well, absolutely. And those kids that I talked to after that classroom presentation said, I don't have anybody at home. Number one, a lot of times both parents are working, there's nobody there, and they don't have the time or the energy to worry about their children's mental health. And more importantly, they don't really understand it. It's just something that teens go through. They're moody, or we all get a little sad and depressed at times. So they dismiss it as just a part of being a normal teen. And that's, that can be the case, but a lot of times if the teen is at a place where they actually reach out for help, it's more than just having a bad day. And when nobody is there to listen, it's pretty devastating. And that's when they feel really alone. And that's when it gets really serious.
So you touched on something earlier that I'd love to go over with you. You talked about technology. And it does seem like, our young people are just so hooked into technology. We grew up in the same era. If people were going to try to bully us, they either had to follow us home or talk to our parents because there weren't, we didn't have iPhones.
Right.
So, we kind of I think are a little bit more at an advantage because we really didn't have all this instant messaging that's happening that's really impacting a lot of young people. What are your thoughts around technology?
Well, I think, I get asked this a lot by parents because they don't want their kids to be left out because that's very stressful. And they get bullied and teased if they're not a part of their clique or their peer group. So the parents are struggling because they want to limit their time online, but yet they don't want their kids to be alienated from their peers. So all of us need to get on the same page with that and put some restrictions and guidelines on the amount of time that they're on social media. They don't need to be up till 2 a.m. gaming or, texting their peers. That stuff needs to be shut down an hour or two before they even go to bed. And there needs to be follow through on that and also I don't think we set very good examples for our teens because I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time on my phone. And yes, a lot of it is business related, but not always. So I think we also need to take a look at ourselves and our technology use because our kids are watching us. So there is a lot that we need to do as an adults to set examples, but we really need to monitor the time that they're online.
I think that's so wise because just never know what's coming across, and having too much bombard them is just too much.
Absolutely.
Well, I think I have time for one more question here. I've got a slew of questions. We're not even touching, even part of your book, Beneath the Surface. But you talk about developing hope. How is that possible when someone feels completely hopeless?
Well, I think first and foremost, we all need to realize that depression is a disease. And just like cancer, diabetes, there's treatment. So when you realize that your thoughts are not you and that your depression is a liar, and you can actually step back from your thoughts and realize that they're not real, then you can start to develop a sense of hope. But you have to separate yourself from the depression. And the first step in doing that is to realize that depression is a disease. And the hard part about that, if you have cancer, of course, you go immediately to the doctor. You wouldn't just sit at home and hope it goes away. That's ridiculous. And people with depression, that and it's not lifting for weeks or months, still are inclined to do absolutely nothing and just let it take its course. And you can actually die from not treating depression, because a lot of times it can end in suicide. So I think you need to separate yourself first and foremost from the disease and realize, hey, it's okay. I have a mental illness and I need help. And when you take that first step, slowly you start to develop a sense of hope. This is not me. This is not going to go on forever. And I eventually will live a happy, healthy life.
I think that's very encouraging, because a lot of times when people are in that place, it feels so dark. They don't know how they're going to get out of it.
Absolutely. And a lot of adults, they just snap out of it. They think that it's a choice. What do you have to be so grim and bleak about? You have, great friends, a great family. You grew up in a great house. You have food, a roof over your head. What do you have to be depressed about? And it's not like you can take inventory of your life and then snap out of it. If you could, everybody with depression would do that. But it's not that simple, because you need help. You need to reach out.
Well, Kristi, where can our listeners connect with you, be part of your community, and learn more about your books?
Well, my book is now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or at bookstores everywhere. And my website is thegriefgirl.com. So they can reach me on my website, ask questions, reach out for help, for if they have questions. That's probably the best place to go, is to my website, thegriefgirl.com.
And they can go there to book you to come and speak at their school or for events, right?
Absolutely. All my blogs from the HuffPost, the Elephant Journal, speaking engagements, anything that they need is all right there on my website.
Perfect. Well, Kristi, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Kristi. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Beneath the Surface, A Teen's Guide to Reaching Out When You or Your Friend is in Crisis. Beneath the Surface is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. If you or anyone you know is in distress and needs someone to talk to, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day and is 100% confidential. The number's 800-273-8255. Again, that number's 800-273-8255. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Mary Ann. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Mary Ann airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.